Greetings friends. Thanks for stopping by for a visit. If you enjoy the video, please subscribe.
I was abducted from my bedroom in 1998 when I was 10 years old. Preface. I want to say that I do not consider myself a UFO guy. I only have a passing interest in aliens and UFOs, but I did experience an abduction, paradoxical as that may seem. Unlike a lot of abductions, I have some evidence, which compels me to share my story. The evidence, which will be given more context within my account, is a scoop in the back of my leg. A small section of tissue was removed as if by a small melon baller. My grade/IQ dramatically increasing in elementary school, and my miraculous recovery/cure of ADHD. During this period in my life, I was failing school and was considered a problem child. I was diagnosed with ADHD, and there was talk of holding me back a grade. After the events of my abduction, my grades went from D's and F's and I's to A's and B's. I did not become a genius, but the change was so dramatic that a child psychologist was sent to test me while I was in school, and they told my parents, my father was a teacher, that I had an IQ of 145. I went on to graduate high school, and I earned a college degree. Records exist of my grades changing in only one semester. My ADHD has never returned, and the scoop on the back of my leg is still present. My account. I was asleep in my bed when I was gently woken up by three entities that looked like standard gray aliens. They had thin arms, legs, torso, but were well proportioned, and their heads were not overly large. Their eyes were very large, black and slightly wrapped around their head. No distinguishable nose or lips, only two small holes for nostrils and a slit for the mouth. They were not naked and had a thin dark-colored onesie-like suit that covered their body up to the neck and not their hands. From my point of view, the setting did not look as if three aliens were simply standing in the room. My vision was obscured. Everything seemed ethereal and uncanny. I could not speak or yell or move, but I did not feel afraid. It was as if a part of me was shut off, or I was anesthetized. At this time, the entities did not speak or communicate in any way, and were in my room for no more than a few seconds. I want to add that my childhood home was on one of the Great Lakes, and it sticks out. Possible that the UFO came down or out of the lake, saw the house, and went to investigate. My next memory is being in a room which I assume was a part of their ship. The room was not a normal room, or a room you would expect on a ship. Everything was cast in an ethereal light with no defined source. The walls were either light in color or far in the distance, because I could not make out the true size of the room. It appeared at times to be endless, but for moments I could make out some structure that may have been the boundaries of the room. If this was the wall, then it could be like glossy ceramic or porcelain in look and texture. One seamless piece, with no visible door or seams or corners. There were no objects in the room, no furniture, no tables, no machines, no controls. I was vertical in the room. I would not say standing, as I did not have the feeling that I was on my feet. I may have been suspended, but I cannot say for certain. The three entities were present in the room, standing about a meter away. My vision was still obscured, and the light was in such a way that the edges of my vision were blurred. I could not see their feet. At this time, I still had no fear. I was calm and felt no strong emotions. I was simply observing, present and conscious. I did feel as though I could speak, but before I could or did, the entities spoke first. I looked at their faces and felt enveloped by their large black eyes. It's all you can really focus on. When they spoke, it was not with their mouths or with audible words. The best way I can describe it is with layered inner voice, images, concepts, feelings, and understanding. It will be difficult to write out the experience I had while communicating with them, but I will do my best. Sentences did not form. It was as if it was instantaneous, from one line to the next. They told me, "Do not be afraid, no fear, no harm/safe." I immediately believed them/felt trust. "We found something wrong, we will fix it/you." I had the understanding that it was something in my brain, neurological, that this will help me again. I felt trust, that this was true. This will not hurt, No pain. Without thinking it or saying it, I thought, okay, or yes, they just obtained that understanding from me. This is when one of them reached down with their hand and brushed the back of my calf. I don't know if it was their finger or if they were holding an object in their hand. They had 3 fingers and a thumb. If it was holding an object, it was so perfect in its form, or whatever it was made of, that I had a hard time seeing it or comprehending it. This is very hard to express. To see a thing but not see it, to know you are looking at something but having no reference to what that thing is or how it could be. That it exists but cannot. Within that brief exchange of communication, more information was exchanged. However, it was one way. I could not freely ask questions. I did not gain any knowledge of them specifically, like where they were from, what they were doing, where I was, etc. I got the sense that they were concerned, not just for me, but for humanity, for the planet. That something was wrong, and it was related to technology being dangerous, and we were becoming sick. That they didn't fix me to help me personally. They were not helping in our sense of the word, but that they found something wrong and wanted to needed to fix it. Fixing is what they do if they find something wrong and have the power to fix it. That I was not selected for any reason. That they visit people randomly to watch and gather information. That some of the people that get visited are checked up on again. I will also say that my interaction with them was very cold. There was no humanity in them, no emotions, so sense of caring. It was like talking to a robot, but also that I was not seeing or gleaning the full scope of their thoughts. So I do not know if they are very suppressed emotionally or if that's how they were presenting themselves to me. I woke up the next morning in my bed. Momentarily, I could recall the events, but I did not feel afraid. I was not concerned about what had happened and had no desire to tell my parents or anyone about what had happened. Within an hour or two, I had forgotten about the event completely. Years later, I could recall some of what had happened, but when I would remember, I was okay about it and felt no need to tell anyone. I suspect that some block/wall was placed in my mind/memories that forced or compelled me to accept it and keep it secret. It's not that it was a secret, it's that I had no desire to tell anyone. During this period of time, I went from getting weekly detentions, failing my classes, and failing would have been an improvement because for many of my classes, I did not even qualify for a letter grade, to becoming a model student. I suffered greatly from ADHD, and my parents, for personal reasons, declined medical treatment. Immediately following my abduction, my grades improved, and I no longer received detentions. The teachers, including my father, could not explain such an improvement in my behavior or grades. In 1999, a child psychologist was sent to the school, and I was tested one-on-one in one of the classrooms. He told my parents that I had an IQ, or 145. I want to say that my IQ has diminished. The aliens did not make me a genius, but I do believe that they fixed my ADHD, and as a byproduct, I'd become more intelligent. I later went on to join the National Honor Society, graduating in the top 10 of my class, and I also earned a college degree. Even though I got the sense that I would be visited again, or they would check up on me, I have not had other abduction or UFO experiences. I have no ill will towards my abductors, but when I recall the events, I still have that same positive yet apathetic feeling that I've always had, but as I get older, I seem to have more agency in my ability to talk openly about it.
Back in the early 1970s, during the UFO wave of '74, 2 of my brothers were living at home while in college. We're heavy into UFO investigation with MUFON and legendary NICAP UFO investigation organizations. My brothers got tired of being there after the fact and taking down pages of interviews and scientific dates on any trace evidence. So they got it into their heads to put their extensive knowledge of amateur radio, electronics, astronomy, and UFOs to good use. They mapped out sighting hotspots and then went out to those locations to camp out. When they spotted anything interesting, they attempted to make contact. It ultimately worked, and their new little friends in those saucers tracked them back to our typical family home in the suburbs. The airspace above our home became a weekly UFO sighting hotspot. So much so that it caught the interest of unmarked military surveillance and later the authentic men in black. Meanwhile, in the wee hours of the night or morning, we would have visitors. I was involved in 2 of those visits as a 6 and later 8-year-old. I woke up in the 2 a.m. to 3 a.m. hour twice, to find an intense blue light shining in from all windows of the house and in the shadows. It is within the house. The shadows moved with small figures not of this earth. I ran into my parents' bedroom in panic and grabbed my father's foot to shake him awake, only to find his entire body move or slide across the surface of the mattress, as weightless as a balloon. I tried again. Again, the same response. I ran around the bed to my mother to shake her awake. She was lying on her side, her face facing me. Her eyes were completely open, and tears were streaming down her cheek. And she was just as weightless and frozen stiff as my father. I ran out of the room now, in panic, into my brother's bedroom. Both of them are the same, this time facing up stiff as boards in their twin beds. And finally, into my sister's room. She was 4 years older than me. My sister's eyes were open, and she was frozen stiff in bed, face up and in a screeching panic, and now in hysterics. I backed out into the hallway, weeping and hyperventilating. Because over my shoulder down the hall and into the living room, some 20 feet away, the shadows were coming at me from every corner. I ran back into my parents' bedroom, grabbing their feet at the foot of the bed, screaming, "Mama! Papa! Mama! Papa!" In the panic, I made a last attempt to get some help. In my mind, screaming, my conscience told me over and over again, "They are all dead." That is when I felt 2 small hands come across the top of my shoulders from behind. 4 fingers each dug into my shoulders. By the grip, they had a delicate female feel to them, but extremely elongated. And I heard a female voice, gentle as an angel, say, "They are all right, little one." The instant I heard that voice, I went limp. The hysterics, the panic, and the sheer horror of the moment vanished and disappeared as if they never existed. Even though facing forward, I watched as my parents' weightless bodies float back and forth on top of their sheetless bed, subsiding from my shaking them moments before. I was now just a silent observer, as if I were watching the scene unfold from above. My body is limp in the grip of this unseen being. Limp without any free will or even the ability to move. She continued, "They are only sleeping. All is fine. You shouldn't be up to see this." I was escorted across the room. We had a 3-bedroom, 1-story typical suburban ranch. Being the youngest, I was forced to have a corner of my parents' bedroom. The room was divided by a fold-out wooden partition, though this night it was down. It escorted me across the room from behind, guiding me and pushing me forward towards my bed, repeating the above line. Finally escorted to my bed, I was turned around and sat down on the edge of my bed, until I faced it face to face. As to what I saw before me, it's on the cover of Whitney Strieber's Communion. She reiterated the above a 3rd time, adding, "Now back to sleep with you." I smiled at her and obeyed completely under hers control. I swung my feet up into bed. Still sitting up, I turned to her one last time, smiled again. And when I turned around in bed, looking down, I saw something I cannot explain, which will sound unbelievable to any reader reading this, including you. I saw my body still in bed, and I laid down back into it, and I went back to sleep. The next morning, I woke up at noon. My mother is shaking me awake. Since I had never slept so long before and had missed my Saturday morning ritual of cartoon watching, I woke up before everyone else, and my snacks set out for the whole Saturday morning cartoon watching ritual. It was noon, and my mom was a bit panicked at my not waking up. But finally, she relieved. I did try to tell my parents what had happened. But parents, being parents, are confronted with such a story. It was just a dream. My brothers, though, turned pale as sheets. They have had similar events, which I learned about much later. Again, this was 1974. Before the UFO phenomenon became a subject of popular media and public consciousness, the UFO subject was still rather underground. I did have a second encounter with the night visitors, as we call them. I again awoke in the middle of a possible abduction of my entire family. She was again there. But this time, it was rather peaceful. It was playful and surprising in that I was surprised here again. And I got a very distinct sense of amusement from her. And she kindly ordered me to go back to bed on my own this time. And I did it without question or putting up a fight. Of course, my mother was across the room, her eyes open, her face frozen in panic, and a silent, frozen scream was across her face. Those are but two of the dozens of UFO-related encounters my family had throughout the 1970s. 2 of 4 things that personally happened to me. The 2 others did not involve a face-to-face encounter. Those 2 events, those 2 fully conscious memories and body-feel memories altered my entire life. In the late 1980s, I entered college myself. Cultural anthropology degree. I also joined MUFON as an investigator and several other formal academic-based organizations into the paranormal, which I will not name here, and for the sake of their tenure and academic reputations, I wouldn't like to be named. All in the hopes of finding answers. Personal answers and truths as to what my entire family and I experienced. In the decades since the on-and-off investigation, I have come in contact with and interviewed true ex-military intelligence operators, people in the know, and even former Apollo astronauts. Which BTW will talk. Only if their stories will never come to light to the larger public. People will be people, even if NDAs are involved. Humans are, after all, notorious gossips. Over a backyard barbecue or sharing a few beers over a mutually enjoyed big game. They will tell you everything when they absolutely trust you as a friend. I can tell you this. David Jacobs is not entirely alarmist in his hypothesis. Nor is Richard Dolan's and Dr. Steve Greer's argument for purely benevolent visitors entirely true. As benevolent as that female voice and being were to me, I will forever see the silent, tearful, frozen scream of my mother and my sister's faces over that visitor's shoulder. We must keep an open mind when it comes to this phenomenon and examine all possibilities. After all, we are dealing with something totally alien and totally foreign. And the likes of the late Stephen Hawking are entirely correct. As we know from history, when the Spanish landed in the New World, North America, it did not go well for the native population.
Hello, I have had several out-of-body experiences / abductions in my early 20s, especially in that decade. My point in telling of these travels is to see if others have had similar abduction-type things happen to themselves. I am interested in the details. No drugs, limited beer, and always in an inquisitive state of mind while taking notes of these happenings, so I don't need to be helped in any way except perhaps with other folks that have had these same types of things happen, telling of the places and feeling they have encountered. One night several years ago, I was inducing an out-of-body experience by following the work of Dr. Monroe. I ended up in a neighbor's driveway while out of body with full mental clarity. I saw my neighbor's dad and said hello. He did not speak. I wondered if he could see me, but his son, who I knew very well, confirmed this when he came out of the house. I waved to him, but he only pointed at the street, not saying anything either. I thought this odd as we were only a couple of feet away from each other. They both were looking intently now, both pointing, so I turned to the street and it hit me. I saw nothing but felt, heard, and smelled in what I can only describe as some sort of scan. A super loud HM started as I was thrown back first onto the driveway by an invisible force. I felt a pressing from above me, hovering over me with coldness, but also carnival music began to fill my head. Cotton candy smell as well as buttered popcorn was wafting. It was overtaking my olfactory senses to the max, and I lay there trying to keep my composure by not freaking. I knew something was interacting with me physically, just could not place it. Felt like I was sliding down the driveway, but was strangely not having any pain. Then it was over that I was left in total darkness, and I snapped back into my body with an elastic-type slap. I was sweating oddly, as I don't really sweat in the middle of winter in the Midwest. Years later, I saw an X-Files episode with similar abduction characteristics. Anyone else have similar details like that happen? Do they think carnival-type music and smells will make a human more comfortable?
Hi all, I don't post much, so apologies if this is too long. I've tried to cut it down while keeping all the necessary info in. Context: when I, 38 male, was 18, I lived in a suburb of southeast Melbourne, Australia, Noble Park. Our house was the odd one out. On a street of 70s/80s brick homes, ours was an Alpine-style weatherboard home with a steep roof built in the early 20th century. It was old, cold, and noisy, and you could see the ground through the gaps in the floorboards. We had a big dog who stayed outside until everyone was home, and then slept outside in a big pen/doghouse at night, mostly in the summer. We also have an indoor cat. The week it happened, I was home alone. Dad was overseas. Mom and sis were visiting family. What happened? One night when walking home from work, I rounded the corner and noticed a figure standing on our carport roof, looking through a window into one of 3 upstairs bedrooms. The sun was setting, so all I could see was a dark silhouette. I yelled at it from the top of the driveway and it was gone. I remember thinking it odd that my dog didn't bark or notice anything. I went inside, checked the house, the dog, the windows and doors, etc., and everything seemed in place. I assumed I had just seen a shadow from a nearby tree at sunset. The following night, I walked home from work and everything seemed normal. I checked all windows and doors, let the dog inside for the evening, and eventually put him and myself to bed. My bedroom was upstairs, down the hall from the room next to the carport roof. Before bed, I had a routine of shutting all doors in the house, as they were all squeaky, and the drafts would often blow them closed if left open. This night, I closed all doors, checked locks, turned off all the lights, and went to sleep. In the middle of the night, I was awoken by something. Not sure what, but when I came to, focused my eyes and looked around, I saw the hallway light coming in under my door. I thought I turned it off, but perhaps I forgot. Right then, my doorknob started rattling, like someone was struggling to open the door. I immediately lay back down on my side, facing the wall opposite my bed, and my heart starts beating hard. I hear the door open and close my eyes. I figured if someone is breaking in, I'll pretend I'm asleep and maybe they'll take what they want and leave. I slowly open one eye, the one against the pillow, so it's less obvious. I see the light from the hallway on my wall. My bedroom door is fully open. My heart is beating harder. I lay still. I see the digital clock on my CD player and a little after 2:00 a.m. Then, I hear the door creak again and watch as the light on the wall slowly starts to disappear. The bedroom door is closing. At this point, I'm positive we're being robbed, but I continue to pretend I'm asleep. Keeping one eye open, everything is heightened. The loudest noise is my heartbeat, but I try to listen through it and can't hear anything. No breathing, no footsteps, nothing. At this point, I begin to feel pressure around both my feet. The blanket is getting tighter around them, and I realize that something is now sitting on the end of my bed. I look at the clock again, and it's now a little before 3:00 a.m. I'm frozen, scared, and have no idea what's happening. At some point, I have the idea to slowly readjust my position in bed and move my feet a little to see if something moves or happens. So, I do this, but as I slowly readjust my feet, I feel one of them hit something solid. Something is definitely sitting on the end of my bed. I don't know what to do at this point, so I stay still and listen, while looking through one eye at the clock and the bedroom wall. The next thing I remember is hearing the first birds starting to chirp before sunrise. I look at the clock and it's now a little before 6:00 a.m., and I notice the room is a little brighter. The sun is coming. Shortly after this, I feel the pressure lift from the end of the bed. I hear the bedroom door open. I see the light from the hallway on the wall again, and then the door shuts and the sun starts to rise. I got up shortly after this and checked the whole house. All doors and windows were locked. The dog had slept through the night and nothing from the house was missing. My cat was stuck in the bathroom overnight. He must have followed my in when I brushed my teeth without my noticing. I'm not sure what happened, but I won't forget that night in Noble Park.
I've only told a few people this weird story, but figured it's time to write it down. I still feel like a basket case for typing this on my phone, but I need to get it over with. I'm 37, I live in an apartment, have no sleep issues anymore. I'm good. When I was around 22, my parents had a newly built house in Rehoboth, Massachusetts. I slept upstairs and they stayed downstairs. It is a huge house. Strange things would regularly happen to me. I have a bunch of these stories which I'd only tell if asked. But there's one crazy one that stands out in particular. This is so cringe, but it's the truth. I used to post random away messages on AGM. One was something like out chasing UFOs. Something really corny. I can't believe I'm typing this. I woke up in the middle of the night, maybe 3 a.m. I had a futon in the middle of my room that I slept on sometimes, and a bed near my wall. That night I was laying on my futon. I woke up, opened my eyes while laying down, and thought I was hearing the radio in my head. This wasn't a dream in my opinion. I dream every night. I know what dreaming is. To this day I believe this was real. Anyways, I heard AM radio pretty loud. Thought it was in my head because my electronics, TV were all off, but I heard like Spanish AM radio in my head. It was very audible, but I couldn't focus on what they were saying. I know this makes no sense, but it's the truth. Maybe because I just woke up. I immediately stood up and faced my TV. My whole room was also completely lit up with flashing pulses coming from the window. What's crazy was I was completely calm, in full control, but wouldn't look out the window, because deep inside I was scared and couldn't believe what was happening. I mean, I told myself it was the cops or ambulance. Where I live there are no street lights. I'm in the woods. I have a neighbor's house in front of my dad's house, but no street lights. So I try to look outside, and in the street, probably like 100 feet at the street, there looked to be something small. Maybe the size of a small car, but lower to the ground. It was hard to tell the shape due to how bright it was. This thing was insanely bright, just flashing in an irregular pulse. The whole street and my room were just lit up. The light was a pure white, no blue or red. I was still in a weird shock, but as calm as could be, telling myself, this isn't happening, went and sat on my bed, and next thing you know it was around 7 a.m., and I was still sitting on my bed. I'm 37 now, live in East Providence, my parents still live at that house. Till this day, I'm convinced I saw a UFO land in the middle of my SD, and it had some sort of high-energy interference, which caused some radio to come out of my TV. I've had weird things happen to me at night as well, but told myself I may have been dreaming. I won't get into it now. This is such a weird story, but I can't shake it wasn't a dream. What's funny is how specific the strobe pattern was of the light. I stumbled upon a random video on Reddit of a UAP at night. Look, I'm very skeptical and don't believe everything I see. That video was the one time where I recognized the strobe, never saved it. I don't really post on the internet, but this one, I had to get it out there. I feel crazy writing this and haven't told too many people.
It began yesterday night when I woke up. I went to get a glass of water and came back to my room. I lay back down into bed, and this is where it happened. I saw this bright blue light, which was extremely bright. I feel my body ascend upwards into a sort of tunnel, and then the tunnel transitions onto a tube. Then, I switch and start descending through the tube, flowing through it. I am extremely dazed and a bit confused, but not panicking. I'm uncharacteristically nonchalant about the whole thing, actually, which is odd. At some point, I find myself on a sort of bed in a circular white room, and the bed is against a wall. To describe what this room looks like is difficult, but it is glittery, and there are things across the room I don't understand as I have no frame of reference to properly conceptualize these objects. I am immediately surrounded by what appear to be 3 to 4 foot tall gray aliens. The stereotypical kind. They are touching me and prodding me. They telepathically communicated to me, and it felt like they were saying something along the lines of "Stay calm. Don't be afraid. We love you. We love you. We love you." It's very odd to describe how they communicated, but it was not verbal. My body and mind are then flooded by what I can only describe as a feeling of pure love. It felt like euphoria. However, it seemed as if I could feel their intentions and feelings, as if I was telepathically linked to them slightly. I felt this feeling of love, yet I could feel that these beings did not love me. They, in fact, felt completely emotionless and could not care less about me as a person. This gave off a feeling of deception, and while the feeling of love felt very intense, it ultimately gave me the impression of being fake or synthetic based on the intention of the small grays communicating it to me. While this was happening, there was a taller gray alien standing in front of me who I believe was 5 to 6 feet tall. He seemed to be the leader and gave off a vibe of a doctor. He then said, "Don't be afraid, we mean you no harm, we just have some tests to run on you, and then you can be on your way." The little ones started poking me with stuff and put something around my groin. The leader then said, "We are going to give you something that feels really good." Almost immediately after he said that, I immediately felt myself orgasm. I hadn't communicated anything at this point. The whole experience felt very quick, and I didn't have time to interject anything. I immediately then began to study my environment, looking at the tall gray into his eyes directly, and I asked him, "Who are you?" He then replied to me, saying, "We are known as the O." I didn't recognize the name, but it sounded like the word meteorites or oranites. I'm not sure if the name started with an O or M. I tried to look around more carefully, but my vision was getting blurry. He took notice of my curiosity, and the last thing he said was, "You're not allowed to remember this," as if to tell me that my curiosity and desire to know more about what was going on was ultimately pointless because I would never remember this. The voices of the aliens were very high-pitched, like talking on helium. However, when I tried communicating, my own voice sounded extremely deep and slow. I have no idea what caused this. They spoke English to me, but again, they didn't open their mouths or talk verbally. It was communicated to me inside my head. After this, I simply opened my eyes, and I was sitting on my bed. It's like something I forgot a long time ago, but just now, suddenly remember. I relived it, if that makes any sense. I'm still grappling with what happened, and I have never experienced an abduction before. I have been on a search for some deeper meaning to everything lately. The day before this, before work, I reached out and asked if anyone was listening and to give me a sign.
I still can't make sense of what happened. I've been struggling with it for months now, trying to figure out if I imagined the whole thing, but it feels so real. I know I wasn't dreaming, but I can't explain it. I'm not crazy, I swear, but I feel like I need to talk about this with someone who might understand. So here I am, posting this on Reddit in the hopes that someone out there might have an explanation. Let me give you some background. Last fall, I took a solo hiking trip to Sleeping Bear Dunes up in Michigan. It's one of my favorite places to unwind, beautiful, peaceful, and far enough off the beaten path that you don't run into too many people. That day, I was in need of some serious alone time, so I parked at the dune climb, stretched my legs, and started off down one of the more secluded trails. I'd hiked this route a few times before, so I was familiar with the area, but I decided to venture a bit farther this time. I'd heard rumors about weird stuff happening at the dunes, but I never really took them seriously. I mean, strange things happen in nature all the time, right? Maybe the occasional weird animal sighting or some odd atmospheric phenomena, but nothing that would make me think something out of the ordinary was going to happen. I was walking along the trail when I started to notice something odd. The air felt thick, almost heavy, and the light started to shift. It wasn't like the sun was setting or anything. The colors just seemed wrong. I can't describe it well, but the air felt dense, like I was walking through fog, even though there was none. I didn't feel scared, but I did start to get the sense that I wasn't alone. It wasn't until I saw the ripples in the air that I realized something was seriously off. They weren't like the mirage you get from the heat on the pavement. These ripples were a lot more distinct, and they were coming from the middle of a small clearing ahead of me. I don't know why, but something inside me told me not to go closer, but of course, curiosity got the best of me. So I kept walking. I remember stepping into the clearing, and suddenly, the world around me went dead still. The sound of the wind disappeared. The birds, the trees, the very air, everything just stopped. It felt like time itself had paused. And then, I felt this intense pressure on my chest, like something heavy was sitting on me, weighing me down. I couldn't breathe right, and I could feel my heart start to race. My whole body felt like it was being pulled in some direction, but I couldn't move. That's when I first saw it. I don't know how to describe it well, I do, but nothing I can say will do it justice. It was tall, at least 7 feet, with this insectoid body. Its skin was this weird, almost sickly gray-green color, and its limbs were unnaturally long. Its head was the part that messed me up the most. It had these massive compound eyes like an insect's, but they were too big, too black. And its face, if you could even call it that, was too smooth, too alien. The body seemed almost too thin, like it had been stretched out unnaturally. There were other beings around it, what you would probably call the Greys. They were shorter, with the usual big black eyes, but they didn't seem nearly as important as this one. They were standing in a formation behind it, almost like they were waiting for instructions or something. I couldn't get a good sense of how many of them there were, but I knew the one in front, the big one, was in charge. The whole scene felt like I was witnessing some kind of military hierarchy, like the Greys were just workers or soldiers, and this insect-like thing was the commander. I tried to speak, but my mouth wouldn't move. My voice wouldn't work. I felt paralyzed. I couldn't even scream. It was like my whole body was frozen in place, but my mind was still running a mile a minute. Then the commander, for lack of a better word, turned its attention to me. It didn't speak out loud, but I heard its voice in my head. At least, I think I heard it. It wasn't like normal speech. It was more like it was communicating directly to my thoughts. It didn't ask how I was or anything. It just said, "You're different." That was it. The weird thing is, I don't think it said it to me exactly. It wasn't like a question or a statement meant for conversation. It was like it was just acknowledging my presence. And even stranger, it felt so indifferent. Like I was just an object to be noted, not a person. I wanted to ask questions. I wanted to scream, to demand answers, but I couldn't. I tried to ask, but every time I thought about a question, the words didn't come out. It was like my brain was too slow for the way it communicated. And it seemed like the creature didn't care about my questions. It didn't even acknowledge them. Instead, it just repeated its message, "You're different." That was all it would say. I could feel the Greys moving behind me, around me. They weren't touching me, but they were there, all around me. They were just watching, and I could sense their impatience, like they were uncomfortable with the situation, like they were waiting for something. I noticed the way the commander would glance at them every so often, and I could almost feel its frustration. The worst part was that I could sense a sort of urgency in the Greys. They were working under the commander's direction, but they were hesitant, almost reluctant. It was like they were being forced to do something, but they were also stuck in this strange, rigid role. I felt this weird sense of power dynamics, like they were all trapped in their positions. And the commander? It was completely in control. It didn't seem concerned with me or my situation. It was more interested in keeping everything orderly, like it was managing an operation rather than interacting with a human being. I don't know how long this lasted. Time was warped in that space. Minutes could have been hours, or maybe even seconds. But at some point, I felt this sharp sensation in my chest, and then, just as suddenly as it started, everything shifted. I don't know if it was the commander's doing or something else, but I found myself back at the edge of the trail, the one I had been walking on when I first entered the clearing. My body felt heavy, like I had been knocked out and was just now coming to. I didn't know how I got there. I had no memory of walking back. I was just standing there alone, in the middle of the dunes, with nothing but the sound of the wind and the trees around me. My heart was still racing, and my mind was spinning. I checked my watch, but it was dead. I didn't even remember the last time I'd checked it. I ran back to my car, not looking back at the dunes, and I've been trying to process everything ever since. It's been months, and I still don't have answers. I don't know what the creature wanted, why I was chosen, or what that whole "you're different" thing even meant. I don't know if the Greys were just following orders, or if they were scared of the commander. All I know is that something happened that day, something I can't explain, and now I'm left with more questions than I had before. If anyone has had a similar experience, or if you can help me make sense of what I encountered, please reach out. I can't shake the feeling that there's something I'm missing, something important that I didn't understand in that moment. But I need answers.
When I was young, the neighborhood kids used to play dark hide and seek or dark capture the flag, often pretty late at night. Our parents were okay with it, as long as we didn't leave the neighborhood. It was the early 90s. We were basically thrown out of the house on the weekends. Anyway, one night after the game was over and everyone had gone home, my stepsister and I were hanging out in our front yard, just sitting on one of those green cable boxes talking. At one point, she stops talking and points into the sky and asks about a light in the sky. I turn and look and see it myself. The light was faint blue and was brighter and bigger than the stars around it. It was moving in ways that seemed impossible, and it became aware we were looking at it as soon as I locked eyes on it. I don't know how to describe that. I know that it was just this immediate feeling that it was looking right back at us. Suddenly, the light moved towards us almost in the blink of an eye. It went from being roughly double the size of a star in the sky to as bright as an airplane or helicopter searchlight instantly. There was no sound, and the light didn't illuminate the surrounding area, which gave it a weird feeling. I tried to say something to my sister, but I found myself unable to speak, and I could suddenly barely move. I just reneged, turning my head to see my sister looking very scared, also unable to speak or move. I thought I heard a noise, and the light started shining on me, which made me turn my head back towards the object, and then I felt a piercing light basically blind me. I was like bathed in the blue light. After this, things get a bit hazy, like I was meant to not remember it, even though certain moments are as plain as any memory from that time. I was in a place that was mostly dark, but there were lights that seemed to hover by themselves, with no visible technology, pole etc. holding them up. I don't know if I was laying down or standing up, because there was a feeling of no gravity or downward force in any direction. I remember interacting with an entity that was human-esque, but seemed to be different, like a beautiful person, but they had no male or female characteristics. Completely androgynous, but with very symmetrical and smooth appearance to the face and body. Otherwise, very human-looking. They talked to me, but I was acutely aware that it was in my head and not out loud. It was like moments of being conscious with moments of haziness in between. I don't know how to describe it. I was aware that they were doing things to me, but I don't remember what, but I do distinctly remember a piercing device they inserted just behind my ear on my right side. It went pretty deep, but it didn't hurt. It just felt almost itchy for a second, and they told me they were taking a sample and depositing something that would allow them to remotely monitor me for some time. They explained that this was not the first time they had done this to me specifically, and that they would continue to do so throughout my life, and that there were literally thousands of people they were doing this to. It was a scientific study of some kind that they tried to explain to me, but I honestly don't remember the purpose. I was able to ask them a few other things in the moments of being conscious, like where my sister was, and they explained she was having the same thing done to her. I asked them point blank if they were aliens, and they found it humorous, and told me they were humans from the future, but I got the distinct feeling that this wasn't the truth. Again, I don't know how to describe why I thought this. It was just a different feeling when they told me this versus the other things they were saying. It felt like a lie or simplification of some kind. After some time of being out of it again, I became aware that my body was bathed in blue light again, and the darkness started to recede, and I was able to see the stars and the sky again. I don't know how long it was before I really understood where I was, but at some point, I sort of came to and realized I was sitting on the grass, next to my sister, in the neighbor's yard about 50 to 60 feet from the original spot. My sister came to almost at the same time. We both immediately looked at each other, and then to the sky, and the light was gone, but the sun was coming up. It was then we realized it had been hours. We didn't really talk about what happened. We just felt the need to go inside and go to bed before we got in trouble. It was years later before I ever spoke to my sister about that night, and she remembers much less than I do. She remembers seeing the light, being blinded by it, and then feeling weird, and then waking up beside me. To this day, she has explained it away by us seeing a helicopter in the sky and just falling asleep because we were tired. She won't discuss it beyond that. I honestly had forgotten about this event until 2 years ago, when my wife mentioned that I had a spot behind my right ear that kinda looked like a burn mark or a scar, but also like a pimple/mole. She likes to pop things, and was dying to let me let her try to pop it. When she reminded me of it, the memories of the event flooded back into my head, and I was a bit emotional but agreed to let her mess with it. She tried to pop it but said nothing came out. It's still there, and looks exactly as she describes it, kinda like a mole, but also kinda like a scar. I've had MRIs and other scans throughout the years, but nothing has ever shown up, so I have no idea what it is or if anything is inside there. I try to not think of it now, because although I wasn't scared at the time, it is unnerving to think about now. That's my story as honestly as I remember it.
Coming back from ice fishing, the last day of the year to have ice houses on the lake. My father's sister and I were in his truck, and his friend was towing the ice house. We were coming around the corner, and his friend was a little way back. I remember watching his headlights disappear around corner in the passenger mirror. A few seconds later, I looked at the little air intake a lot of vehicles in the late 80s, early 90s had. You could pull a lever and get some fresh airflow. I looked at that and thought everything was glowing, like I could see all the melting snow on the floor and all around the floor where my feet were. I thought it was crazy bizarre, so I looked up to my father to tell him, and he was looking straight forward, white-knuckling the steering wheel, and all around the vehicle there was a white light, not really blinding bright, but like all the windows were frosted and it was daylight out. I kind of shouted, maybe more concerned than anything, Dad. I said this a few times, and then the light disappeared and we were stopped just around the corner where his friend's headlights disappeared. He looked to be shocked and said, I think we lost Ron, let's turn around here and see what happened. We turned around at a field approach right after the corner and drove 5 minutes back to the lake, and his friend wasn't there. Then we drove home and his friend was there. The ice house was already backed into the spot next to our garage, and his friend seemed worried. The ice house was big and hard to back into the little spot with just one person, and Ron was already had it in place, jacked up on blocks. He said he was coming to look for us since we were almost an hour late. Traveling back to the lake to look for his friend was only a 10-minute drive round trip. Pretty sure we all got abducted that night.
Hi all. Can I leave my story here? I am 30 years old. I live in Russia in the city of Sochi. Yes, in Russia there are also cases of kidnapping by the Greys. My first meeting with the Greys, which I remember, occurred at the age of 11. It was summer, and one night I didn't sleep well and couldn't fall asleep, and somehow I just started to fall asleep, and then in a dream or in reality I saw 3 strange creatures in my room. I didn't know who they were then. But this strange meeting did not pass without a trace. After some time I began to be interested in the topic of UFOs and aliens. Before that, I, an 11-year-old girl, was not interested in such things. Time passed, and I plunged deeper and deeper into ufology and everything connected with it. I read books, collected magazines, watched films. At this time I don't remember well whether there were abductions or not. Over time and as I grew older, the UFO subject faded away from me and I completely ceased to be interested in it in any way. But since 2016, their visits have resumed again, but with more regular frequency. Now I'll tell you in order how and what happened. In May 2015, I moved from Sochi to Krasnodar. And already in February I have exactly the same meeting with those 3 strange creatures that I had at the age of 11. Only I was already 21 years old, and I lived in another city. And again this meeting takes me back to the study of UFOs and ufology, and everything happens as it did then. But this time I will begin to remember almost all of their visits and contacts. March 2016, I wake up in the middle of the night from something incomprehensible, and then I find myself on a UFO spaceship and I see 2 aliens bending over me, and one of them leaned very close to me and began to look intently into my eyes. The eyes were large, black, without pupils. I remember all their movements, touches, sounds, breathing, smells. Then I suddenly wake up in my bed and think, oh God, what just happened? And this immerses me even more into the topic of UFOs and ufology. I don't remember the date and time of the next abduction, but I remember the details. I slept at night, then I woke up and went to the window and saw that a UFO was flying over the neighboring house, and I decided to wave at it. I think they won't notice. No, they noticed and flew away to my window, and I instantly found myself on their ship. And I remember well how one of the greys came up to me and stuck a huge needle right into my nose, and it went straight into my brain. I heard a click and realized that they had inserted something into my brain. And when I woke up in the morning, my nose started bleeding. Next meeting. May 4th, 2016. Then something happened that is very difficult to forget. Another kidnapping. They took me onto the ship again, looked at me and did something in my lower abdomen. In the morning when I woke up, I thought, God, what happened? And 2 weeks before my period, my lower abdomen began to pull, and then my period stopped for exactly 4 months. Then, in the fall and winter of 2016 to 2017, I had a dream that I was standing in a deserted area and saw a girl next to me. She came up to me and said, "You know me?" To which I answer her no, and she tells me, "And I'm your daughter." This shocked me very much, since I didn't have children and still don't. And I'm not in a relationship with anyone. Next meeting. It was June 29th, 2017. I woke up in the middle of the night and realized that there was someone in the room. And I see Gray coming to my bed and telling me to follow him. I got up and went to the window and saw a huge UFO hanging over the house, and I began to climb up the beam and see how I was moving away from my house. Here I am, I find myself on the UFO itself and walk along the corridor and constantly look back, and these 3 Greys keep pushing me. They say, "Go faster." Then I entered a large room. There was a table and a huge screen. As soon as I entered the room, that tall Grey comes up to me and says, "Hurry up, I'm waiting for you." And quickly lie down on the table. I went up and lay down on the table, then he came up again and leaned very close to me, so that something like his nose was buried in me. Everything was very close. Such powerful and very pleasant energy came from him. Then he gets up and says to me, "You are ready, my dear, I love you." And what happened next is difficult for me to describe what happened. In the morning, when I woke up, I felt so bad. I felt nauseous, my lower abdomen hurt. That day I still went to work, but I felt so bad that I had to take time off. And again my period stopped for 3 months, and somewhere at the end of 2017, I had a dream that I was there on a spaceship and I saw Gray, who brought 3 hybrids, a girl and a boy, and another boy about 12 years old. I talked to them and hugged them. Strange sensations. And there were many such abductions, some I forgot or don't remember, you know, they block the memory well. But the most interesting thing is not even the aliens themselves or the abductions, but how it affects my life. When you cannot find answers to what is happening, then out of despair you simply give it up and start doing other things. That's how I came to religion. I am a Catholic from Russia. But some event related to UFOs occurs, and I return to this topic again. Either I will meet an alien museum in my city, then a ufologist is looking for me to talk to me, so that I tell about my meetings, then they will answer me in a comment that I wrote 5 to 6 years ago, then I will write for no reason in MUFON, and this happens all the time, and I don't know why they do this. How does the kidnapping process work? Over the course of a day or so, my interest in UFOs, gray aliens, and their abduction skyrockets. I think about them, call them, feel that a kidnapping is about to happen. I'm preparing mentally, physically, psychologically. I may not remember the day or night of the kidnapping, depending on what happened, but after the kidnapping it takes me a week to come to my senses. And this is how I live my whole life. In some places I'm used to what's happening, in others I'm not. There is still a lot of strange and frightening things there. I am writing the truth. In my case I am not looking for the glory of a contactee, or to write a lie, or that I made it up. I myself want this to be my sick imagination, so that it would be easier for my psyche to accept this than the fact that all this could be reality. P.S. I've never had sleep paralysis.
Inspired by a previous post, I'll share my experience. First, there is a history of interactions in my family. In the 70s, my mother had a saucer fly over her car in rural Oklahoma. She was alone and driving on the highway. Kraft went over her car and all the electronics shut off, the car engine as well. When it left, everything turned back on. Don't know if she had further interactions. She was very leery of telling me this story, so I didn't push. My father has seen Kraft, including a mass sighting at a high school football game. Neither have told me of additional experiences due to the stigma. They are really simple rural people. Mine was very different. I was 7 years old living in a farmhouse. Twin beds in my room with our heads facing the windows. I woke up suddenly one night and looked out the windows to see 2 gray alien heads peering in my windows. I was completely paralyzed. I peed my bed and couldn't move. It was sheer terror. I couldn't move my head. I was staring at them and unable to look away. They spoke to me in my head. They asked me questions mostly. One of them was, if you could have any gift, what would you choose? I was raised in a very religious household. The Bible was very much a core part of our lives. I answered, I would want to be as wise as King Solomon. I remember bits and pieces of the experience. But it is hazy. It's not just the passage of time, but like something was affecting my memory. I was suddenly back in my bed. I was too afraid to move. I was a child that had learning disabilities. I was behind in kindergarten. My parents told me later that I was being considered to be held back a grade. I suddenly was one of the best readers in my school. I was a bright student that God has. I don't know if that was a correlation to the incident, but my parents found it curious about the sudden change. In 6th grade, I set a national record in Accelerated Reader. It was a program where you read books and took tests to get points based on your reading comprehension. I had more points than our entire school combined. Ironically, they gave me a book as a reward signed by my favorite author. I was an honors student. Graduated college with all honors and started successful businesses over the last 15 years. I'm in AI now and wonder if the trajectory of my life was somehow altered that night. I haven't wanted to share this story because of the stigma growing up. I've probably told 4 or 5 people this story, and the reaction was never positive. It's just too hard for someone to think it really happened. I've heard it was just sleep paralysis or your imagination as a young kid. But I saw their faces, and I've never been that terrified. I'll be honest. I'm glad I don't remember more than that point. I don't have memories of me leaving my bed. Just their voices. Their voices weren't scary, somewhat soothing. Take this for what you want. It's the truth, the best I can remember. But I have no interest in getting any attention over it. I would never subject myself to the public ridicule of people who think we are alone in the universe. I'll answer limited questions if you are curious.
I am going to share something that I have never told anyone else except my partner. Just recently, after many years of having all the clues, did I put the pieces together, and the hypothesis in my mind made me both ecstatic and a bit apprehensive. When I was a little boy, I would say I was between the ages of 7 and 10, would have recurring dreams, almost nightly, where I would have my legs bent with my hands under my shins and I would be slowly floating from my second-story bedroom, down the stairway, making a right turn towards the kitchen, entering the kitchen towards the back door, and then, nothing. That's as far as I could ever remember. I never put much thought into it, but what was very odd was that back then, this is when tube TVs were still the only televisions available, we had a 25-inch console TV, as most homes in the 70s, and I could hear a very, very high-pitched note when the TV was operating. My mother thought I was loony, so I sat on the top step of the stairway completely out of sight of the TV set, and I told her to turn down the volume all the way and randomly select to turn the power on and off to the TV, and I would let her know when I thought it was in the on state. I passed with flying colors. Now I know that in youth our hearing is substantially more keen, but this was always just a bit odd to me. And it wasn't like I had super hearing, it was only the TV and what I was guessing, the high voltage in the TV set. Sometime later I recall my mother telling me that she was having nightmares about UFOs landing in the lot across the street from our home. At that time, our neighbors were just getting ready to build a new home and they were clearing the lot to prepare for the build. I found this to be particularly odd because my mother, while open-minded, didn't particularly believe in the whole UFO/UAP phenomenon. I also recount a discussion my mother and father were having in the car one day about people from another world. At first, I didn't tune into the conversation, but then something they said made me pay attention more. I recall them specifically saying something to the effect of, they would most likely not be benevolent, as they would be of higher intelligence and without need of violence. I'm paraphrasing, as my young mind was quite capable of interpreting their exact meaning, but my now middle-aged mind isn't so adept at remembering the exact wording. Which is one of the reasons I am putting all of this in textual form now, before time takes its toll and these memories are lost in the ether. Then, one day I was going to visit my mother in the little town of Elport, Pennsylvania, where I grew up. I was now in my late teens or early 20s, and she was still residing in the family home where I was raised. As I walked down the sidewalk and onto the back porch, I looked over at the neighbor's yard, an elderly widowed female who would now be in her late 70s to mid-80s. I was taken back when I noticed 2 perfect circles in her yard where the grass was noticeably greener than all the rest. They were side by side, and one was slightly more towards the north than the former, but they were about 5 foot to 6 in diameter and perfectly round. When my mother answered the back door, I asked her, "What are those 2 circles in Anne's yard?" And my mother replied, "We don't know, they just showed up one day." "Does she have a well or septic system there?" I asked. "Nope. We are all on public utilities on this street," she replied. That was all that was said about it, but I never forgot how weird that seemed. I can't recall when I first noticed the small bump on my right shin, almost midway between my knee and ankle, placing it almost central in my leg, but I always just thought at some point in my childhood I had fallen and probably a small rock got embedded into the wound. How else does one explain a small object under the skin that can be moved around, doesn't hurt, but looks like nothing else they have experienced? I was sure that's what it was. This small, dense object remained there for a very long time. Then one day, not too awful long ago, I was involved in a conversation about such things, specifically, unexplained bumps under the skin. But when I went to show the person with whom I was conversing my interesting little companion, it had vanished. At first I thought it moved to the side slightly, and maybe my shin bone was keeping it from being readily found, but no, it was gone. How could something just vanish like that after being in my leg for years? It was after this discovery that my heavy contemplation put everything into perspective. Up until this point, I never really gave it much thought, much less connected the dots. The implication hit me like a brick. Could I have been taken as a small boy? Is that why I could feel myself floating around my childhood home? Were the dreams my mother was having actual events she was witnessing, but made to seem like a dream? Were the strange circles in Anne's yard proof that something was happening near my childhood home? And lastly, was the small object in my leg some sort of tracking device or something else put there on purpose? When all the pieces came together, I could feel the hair standing up on my arms. Holy shit! Is this why I don't feel quite like I belong on this earth? Is this why I see humans as the scourge of the earth? What the fuck is wrong with me? Why do I have a deep-rooted fascination with the pyramids? And the Anunnaki? Sirius and the movie, Close Encounters of the Third Kind. Am I just one of those flaky people and all this shit is manifesting itself a reality in my consciousness? But what about all the stuff that happened to me that is fact and engraved in my mind? The anxiety and frustration of not knowing weighs heavy some days. Somewhere or someone has the answers, and I can only hope that I am still around when they are shared. I think the world is ready to embrace it. I know I am.
Thanks for watching. If you want to hear more stories like these, please like and subscribe.